So glad to see so many of our friends joining us. Thank you.
So just quickly before we start, and Kathy Mears, our interim president and CEO, will get us started. Just to let you know, there is a Q&A section that we'll be referring to. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the slides and the recording for the session will be shared to registered participants.
So I think we'll go ahead and begin. So welcome. We're so very glad that you're joining us. We know you have a busy day and we know that you have lots to do, but we thank you because we think this is very important information. So thanks for being here. I also want to say that if you're a superintendent or if you are maybe a member of a philanthropy group, that we are going to break this out and have other webinars so that we can digest this data in smaller groups and figure out ways that we can support Catholic education. So this is the first of a series. You will be getting information about future webinars that you can sign up to attend, and we hope that you will, because I think it's going to take all of us to address the challenges that this data presents. So first of all, I want to start out with thank yous because there are a lot of people to thank. But most importantly, we need to thank Sister Dale McDonald, who's been doing this work at NCEA for a number of years. And we are really grateful to her for her leadership and help in gathering the data. Two newer members of our team, John Reyes and Annie Smith, we also want to thank because they've worked very hard on this. I also want to thank Fatica. They have a working group that is just really trying to focus on data in Catholic schools, and they have been very supportive of us. So we're very grateful to Fatica and all the members there who have supported us in our work in data. This is the 51st year that we've collected this data and shared it. And I think that's really important to note. As I talked to Sister Dale, who's been doing this for a while, and others, we've been putting out a press release in this data for 51 years. This is the first year we got attention. So I don't know what that means exactly, except I think God is providing us a moment that we get to share that the beauty of Catholic education is that we are teaching children to seek beauty and grace and goodness and the truth, and that it is in that integration for seeking those things that our students thrive. And we want to make sure that we have as many people who want a Catholic education that they are able to obtain a Catholic education. And we're hoping that this data will provide us with new insights and pathways so that we can find solutions to the challenges of some of our schools being under-enrolled. Finally, I want to say to you that we didn't do this perfectly, and we apologize if you think we should have done something differently. I will tell you that anything that you like about this, it was accomplished by Dale, Sister Dale, John, and Annie. And if you're not happy with something, it's my fault. So please keep that in mind, and you are welcome to email me. I think everybody knows my email, but if you don't, I'll put it in the chat box so you have it. But we're very, very grateful for you for joining us, and for all the schools and dioceses who sent us the data. Thank you, because you made this report happen. You really wrote the report, and we are very grateful. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn it over. Annie, I think we're going to have a prayer first, right? So let's go with the prayer, and I will lead us in prayer. So if we could place ourselves in the loving presence of our God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Loving Heavenly Father, we come to you this hour asking for your blessing and help as we are gathered together. We pray for guidance in the matters at hand and ask that you would clearly show us how to conduct our work with a spirit of joy and enthusiasm. Give us the desire to find ways to excel in our work. Help us to work together and encourage each other to excellence. We ask that we would challenge each other to reach higher and farther to be the best that we can be. We ask this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So now I will turn it over to Sister Dale, Annie, and John. And again, keeping in mind that we believe that this is a great moment for Catholic education, and we're going to be able to accomplish much. I also want to say, I want to thank, there are several members of the media who have joined us for this webinar, and we thank you for your attendance. That's new for NCEA too, and we're grateful that you're here and helping us share the story of the good news that is Catholic education. So I think, Annie, I think it's your turn.
Yep. Thank you so much, Kathy, for introducing us. So our agenda today, I'll walk us through some key findings, then I'll pass it over to John Reyes, who will talk about misconceptions and limitations. And then finally, Sister Dale McDonald will talk about challenges and opportunities for our schools. There's a Q&A box, so you can fill in any questions that you have there, and we will answer them at the end. I know there's going to be a lot of data, so we're happy to answer any questions you have. So before we dive into the key findings, we just wanted to let you know the data collection process. So the data we receive is reported by schools, which is then given to the diocesan offices, which is then given to us at NCEA. So we receive only the aggregate data by diocese. This data is collected as of September 18th, 2020. So there are some limitations with that data. For example, in 2005, New Orleans had Hurricane Katrina, so we don't really have any data from 2005 in New Orleans. This year we had one diocese report a private school's enrollment information that they had never included before, and so their enrollment seemingly went up because they weren't included last year. So our data is limited by what we receive from the diocese. So with that said, as you may have read in the news, Catholic school enrollment saw the largest decrease in the last 50 years. Of 6.4%. Before 1970, we didn't collect year-over-year data, so we're not sure if this is the largest decrease ever or just the largest recorded. We saw our peak of Catholic school enrollment in the 1960s at 5.2 million, and so now we're at 1.6 million. 1.1 million of those students are elementary students, and 500,000 of those students are secondary students. So that decrease of 6.4% was largely impacted by elementary school students. So this graph here shows the year-over-year change in enrollment for elementary, secondary, and total. So this 8.1% shows that enrollment in elementary school students decreased by 8.1% from last year to this year. You can see in the past for elementary it was about 2 to 3%, and for secondary it's been about 2 to 2.5%. So secondary almost stayed even with the decrease as last year, but really it's been elementary school students who are really impacted by the pandemic. So when we dig deeper into what students we lost, this graph has a lot on it, I know. So this is showing you the year-over-year change from 2005 to 2016 in blue, 2018 to 2019 in a maroon, and 2019 to 2020 in yellow, and it's by grade level. So you can see 9th through 12th grade lost 5% of their students, and in the past it was more 1 to 2% in 2019 and 2016. And you can say for preschool, we lost 27% of our students in preschool. And in 2016, we actually had an increase in preschool. So in the past where we saw an increase in preschool, this year we've had a huge decrease. And 40% of the 111,000 students that we lost can be attributed to the preschool students.
Annie, if you could, the question has come up, what is a pre-K student? How do we define that? So if you could address that while that slide's up there, that might be helpful.
Yep, so preschool student, so a kindergarten student is age 5 as of September 1st, and so a preschool student is under age 5 as of September 1st.
Thank you.
When we break it down by diocese, the largest 11 dioceses lost 39,000 students, which is 30% of the enrollment decrease. And then I just listed down below who the largest 11 dioceses are. While the 163 other dioceses lost 72,000 of their students. So the largest 11 dioceses had a greater percent change in enrollment at 7.5% than the other dioceses. And as you can see, they're located in metro areas. I see grade 3 students. Yes, grade 3 was here, 3 to 5 was here for the question in the chat box.
Annie, let me just interject. For the question that was earlier, the pre-K includes pre-K 2, 3, or 4. However, this school categorizes it. We just collect PK as one block. So it could be 3 levels, it could be 1 or just 2. So if that helps with the question before.
Thanks, Dale. And all these slides will be available in a PDF form as well as the recording afterwards.
So Annie, when we're on pre-K, we have a couple more. Sister, I think you already clarified the ages. You know, it could be 3-year-olds. We know some schools are taking children younger than that. So yes, those are separated. And someone has suggested that maybe we separate this data out in the future, pre-K versus K through 8. And we can definitely look at that and consider it. And maybe it's not either or, maybe it's both. So we will definitely take that in consideration. Yep,
and when we took out pre-K for the change in enrollment, it went from, I think 6.4% to 4.2%. So it's still a lot greater. It's still greater than any change we've had in the past.
But less than the 6.4.
Yes, less than the 6.4. So then when we look at student enrollment by region over the last 2 decades, you could see Mid-East, which is the New York, Pennsylvania area. They used to have the largest enrollment. And over the last 2 years, they've lost, 2 decades, they've lost half of their students. And so now their enrollment is similar to the West Far West, as well as the Great Lakes region in New England. And Gray has also lost more than half their students. And what I think is interesting is looking at the change in enrollment year over year from 2019 to this year and the change in the number of schools. And you could see, although the Mid-East lost a bunch of schools, they also lost students. The West Far West, which is like LA, Texas, they lost a lot of students, but they didn't close that many schools. And so we think that's because they weren't allowed to have in-person learning. So they had less students, especially in the pre-K. And so their enrollment decreased, even though they may have been able to keep their schools open. How do we define secondary school? Is a school, a secondary school is a school that has 7th through 12th grade students. An elementary school is K through 6 or K through 8, or they might just be in middle school. So on the slide before that, again, the questions, I just grabbed just the 9th through 12th grade students so you could see what their change was. So even though it's different than the secondary school enrollment percentage change. So when we look at the number of schools year over year, we had 209 schools close. There was a net loss of 202, and that's because we've had mergers and then 17 schools open. And so when we say a school opened, it could be that 2 or 3 schools merged and created a new entity. So that can be an open school or it can be a completely new school. So we're not sure, but that 17 schools is about average. We usually have about 15-ish schools that open every single year. And you can see we have a lot more elementary schools similar to elementary students.
Annie, do you mind taking a question or two, or
Yep.
do you want to keep going?
Yep.
Okay, so people want to know what are the various regions when we have this site up, you know, what makes up the Midwest or New England or whatever?
So I think New England's pretty obvious. West Far West is, you know, the California, Texas area. Southeast is Sister Dale. Do you want to jump in with all the different? You're probably better at knowing all of them. I can name all the names. So Plains is like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. Mideast is DC, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania. Great Lakes is Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. And then Southeast is like Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, West Virginia, Alabama.
You did well. So someone wants to know on secondary schools, it says the slide shows that grades 9 through 12 decreased by 5%, but secondary school enrollment declined by 2.5%.
Yeah, so that was because I grabbed just the 9th through 12th grade students. So a secondary school could have 6th through 8th grade students. So I just wanted to see by grades, where are we losing students? So that's why the secondary school enrollment includes 6th through 8th grade students at times. And so that's why it's a difference between the 2.5% versus 5%.
Okay, I think those are the questions that go with specific slides.
Okay, great.
We'll have more about these topics. We're not going to exclude your questions, but when the slide's up, it's sometimes helpful to see it at the same time.
Great. Thanks, Kathy, for moderating.
You're okay.
So breaking down the number of schools by their governance structure. So as you know, our schools can be parish schools with one parish, an inter-parish where multiple parishes have governance. They could be a diocesan school, or they could be a private school with a completely separate board or run by a religious order. And so the number of elementary parish schools has decreased by 43% in the last 2 decades. So they've had a huge impact. And you could see diocesan schools have actually had a slight, have had an increase in the last 2 decades. So I'm guessing some of the parish schools have become diocesan schools, have changed governance over time. And you can see for secondary schools, private and diocesan have remained relatively steady, while parish has slightly decreased. When we look at the location that schools are in, so this is self-reported by schools, whether they're inner city, rural, suburban, or urban. The number of urban and inner city schools has decreased by 37% in the last 2 decades. And we've seen where suburbans had the lowest amount of decrease at only 11%. So it's really the inner city and urban schools have been really impacted by school closures. And then when we break down the schools that actually closed by elementary versus secondary, you can see elementary schools closed, more elementary schools closed. Out of the schools that were open last year, 3.7% of the elementary schools closed this year, and then 1.9% of the secondary schools. So they closed at almost double the rate of secondary schools. So we wanted to know here at NCEA what was the impact of those school closures and who was impacted by them. So we collected individual school data from the schools that closed, and we received 70% of the elementary schools data to see, and we broke that down to compare to all schools. So this gray bar is all schools for 2019, their demographics, and the maroon is demographics from schools that closed or merged. And so you can see schools that closed and merged had a higher rate of Title I students, a higher rate of Black students, and they had less Catholic students. So it's really, the school closures really disproportionately impacted underserved families and non-Catholic families. And then here is the closed and merged schools location versus all elementary schools. And you can see again, there are more urban and inner city schools, which matches the trend that we saw over the last 20 years, where more schools in our cities are closing. And this matched data that the Cato Institute also found. When we look at the percent of students by race, the percent of multiracial students has increased from 1.7% in the last 2 decades to 7.2%, which is this black line. And the percent of white students has remained relatively steady. But the biggest caveat is that the percent of unknown students, which is this like pale color, went from 0% to about 6%. So we're not sure if those students, where they fall, so that they could have an impact on student enrollment by race. Next, when we look at student enrollment by ethnicity, you can see Hispanic Latino enrollment has increased from about 14% to 18% in the last 8 years. And more students in elementary schools are Hispanic than secondary schools. 2012 is when we first started collecting it as race and ethnicity separate to match the US Census. So we only have it for the last 8 years.
Annie, a question that might be something that would be helpful to explain before we go any further is there a difference between urban and inner city?
Yes, there is a difference. The difference between urban and inner city is inner city has a greater population of poor, low income. I think it's about 40% of their population has to be low income to be defined as inner city. When I was giving those rates, I added them together, urban and inner city, because it's self-reported by the school. And sometimes the school one year could say they're urban and another year say they're inner city and back and forth. I do want to call out that DC is currently doing a study with NCEA on sustaining the legacy. So they're looking specifically at urban and inner city schools and their change over the last 20 years. And they'll also be talking about a convention on April 6th to the 8th. So if you haven't signed up for convention, you should sign up and you can learn more about their data.
And we're very grateful to our colleagues at Boston College for working with us on that.
When we look at non-Catholic student enrollment, back in 1970, only 2.7% of our students were non-Catholic. And today it's at 19.7%. And it had a slight increase over last year. So we're not sure if the new students that have enrolled are more non-Catholic, but we just thought that was interesting. And then this graph shows the percent of students receiving Title I and free and reduced price lunch. So Title I is in blue and free and reduced price lunch is in green. And the biggest caveat here is this is the percent of students receiving Title I and free and reduced price lunch. So there could be a lot more students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, but their school might not participate in the program, or their diocese might not report the data to us. So this is just what we've received from the diocese about students who are receiving Title I and free and reduced price lunch. And you can see we saw a 1% increase of students who are receiving free and reduced price lunch over last year. So there could be, this could show that with the pandemic, there's a greater need for tuition assistance. And then starting in 2014, we started collecting the percent of students who have special needs. And so in the last 6 years, that's risen from 3.5% to 6.1% of our students. And again, the huge caveat is, a lot of times parents might have their students attend a Catholic school and not want special needs services. And so this could be a lot higher and the students are just not receiving the services. And then lastly, when we look at the percent of schools with wait lists, you can see this has increased from 28.5% to 39.7% in the last year. So there are a lot more schools with wait lists than prior years. And this could be given local and state guidelines and physical constraints. Our schools may have had decreased capacity, so they had to increase wait lists. It also could only be one grade. So if a school has just one grade with a wait list, then they're considered a school with a wait list. So we're not sure. I see what is a special need defined as in this chart. So a student with a special need is just a diagnosed disability from the school. And then I'm going to turn it, I know that was a lot of data, so we'll have questions to answer at the end, but I'm going to turn it over to John Reyes for now.
Great, thank you, Annie. So a lot of data, and now we want to shift and place some of this data in the context of understanding how we can interpret that data and using the data to help us sort of test some of the assumptions that we have about Catholic school enrollment and school closures. One of the things that I want to reiterate that Annie did a really good job of explaining earlier is that our data and our research is very much descriptive and not explanatory. That's a really important distinction, right? Our research over the last 50 years has been saying this is the reality, not necessarily able to explain here's why certain outcomes are the way they are. Like there was a great question that I responded to that had to do with the dispersion and the concentration of schools in a particular area and whether that had an impact on school closure. So those are great questions, but it's always important to understand sort of the limitations, but also address some of the misconceptions that might exist about the data. So let's start with the first one. And this one has to do with the historical context of school closure, or not school closures, but enrollment change. And so one of the things that's referenced in the data brief is placing this 6.4% drop within the context of other sort of significant external phenomenon in the nation. So we'll put this graph up real quick here. And what you're going to see in this graph is the enrollment change from fall of 19 to fall of 2020 versus other sort of key moments that could have impacted Catholic school enrollment. So 2008 is on there because that was sort of the height of the economic crisis that came out of the subprime mortgage crisis and the market collapse. And so what we saw this year from last year is that enrollment change was significantly higher than that 08 economic crunch. 2003 is on here because that's the most, that's in the wake of the pieces related to the church or sex abuse crisis and those scandals. One caveat specifically with the data from 2003 is that research that has been done studying the impact of the sex abuse crisis on Catholic school enrollment has not yielded any significant correlation or causation between those events and Catholic school enrollment. So that's a phenomenon that has been studied, but there hasn't been any research to date to suggest a specific correlation or causation between those two pieces. And then the last piece that's on here is 1972, which is seems kind of random, but up until this year, the enrollment change from 1971 to 1972 was the single largest drop in Catholic school enrollment. And that coincided with the end of the baby boomer era. So a couple of pieces here just to place this in context and sort of help us understand the universal challenge that we're having as a system of Catholic schools across the nation. Next, let's talk about specific impacts on enrollment in different regions of the country. So the first thing that I'm going to show here, which was included in our data brief, are the 8 dioceses that grew 1% or more. So there were 8 dioceses, and we'll put that up. That'll be the first one that'll, oh, never mind. Do that backwards. If we just put the second one up, Annie, that would be awesome. Okay, so on the right-hand side, you're seeing the 8 dioceses that grew by 1% or more. So you can see it by percent change and by number change. And on the left-hand side, what you're seeing there is the enrollment change for the top 10 dioceses. We know that Catholic schools did benefit from families leaving public schools, from families leaving other schools. But the net change in terms of enrollment shows that there are significant challenges, especially in urban areas. And if you look at the list on the left-hand side of those top 10 dioceses, and those are top 10 dioceses in terms of overall enrollment, they're the same top 10 from last year to this year, is that impact really varied versus the average 6.4 or the aggregate 6.4% drop across the nation. The next piece I want to bring up is the impact of the attrition enrollment to staffing. So overall, again, we saw 6.4% drop in our student enrollment, and our staffing count dropped by about 2.3%. Here's some important context. Over the last 20 years, there has not been a particular correlation or connection between changes in staffing and changes in enrollment, right? So they have not sort of followed each other in some sort of discernible fashion. The median staffing change over the last 20 years is zero, let me see if I get this right, 0.45%, right? So staffing has remained relatively flat as a sort of a year-over-year average. One of our limitations here, this is a big limitation in terms of what could explain the change in staffing versus the change in enrollment, is that we do not have a data on the impact of the Paycheck Protection Program or on school reopening guidelines on staffing changes as a nation. We know that certain dioceses, certain schools have kept track and are much more capable of speaking to the impacts of those programs or those guidelines on their particular staffing changes. But we're presenting this as sort of a broader context here. A piece that'll help us understand this is really looking at the change in staffing ratios and over the last 20 to 30 years. So first thing that you're seeing here, this is the staffing ratio for elementary schools, secondary schools, and all schools over the last 20 years. There's another element to this that could be understood not just in terms of the economics of staffing schools, but also instructional effectiveness, but we're not going to touch that. What you can see here is that the student to staff ratio has dropped steadily across the nation and has remained below the average staffing ratio, student to staff ratio in public schools over the last 20 years. So to the point where we're now operating at a student to staff ratio of about 11:1 across the nation. Here's the piece that has implications on the finance side. In 1990, we had less full-time staff in schools. So we had about 136,900 versus the 142,000, we'll call it 143,000 staff that we have in schools today. So it's about a 7,000 staff number difference. The eye-opening piece is that in 1990, we had 7,000 less full-time staff in our Catholic schools, but almost 1 million more students in Catholic schools across the nation, right? And the big picture takeaway here is that the cost to educate Catholic school students has increased significantly since 2000 and can be partially explained by this decrease in the student to staff ratio. We know that there are other potential interacting factors, including the distribution of lay versus religious staff in our schools, but this is something that can definitely help us understand the potential impacts on Catholic school enrollment. Two more pieces here that we want to address. This one is a really interesting and a really important one for us here at NCEA, and this has to do about, well, how did states that offered parental choice programs, how did they fare, right? And we fully believe at NCEA that the availability of parental choice is essential to providing Catholic education for all. So what you're seeing here are 4 particular states that we focused our analysis on: Ohio, Arizona, Florida, and Indiana, widely known to have some of the most widely available parental choice programs. What you're seeing in that black bar, that's the national change. And as you can see, Ohio, Arizona, Florida, and Indiana all perform differently at the state level versus the aggregate enrollment change across the nation. One of the things to note in context for those that are sort of trying to wrap their heads around the impact of school choice and parent choice on enrollment is that school choice programs vary in terms of their funding mechanisms. They vary in terms of their criteria, right? So like we know, for example, that in the state of Ohio, that there are coexisting state programs that exist at the state level, as well as at the city, county, local jurisdiction level. And so it's hard for us. It would be unfounded for us to draw a conclusion about the overall impact of parental choice on Catholic school enrollment at the state level, simply because of our own reporting mechanisms and the variety of ways that school choice is provided. One thing to note, though, I think on the other side, and actually we'll make it 2 things, is that top 8 list that you're seeing on the right-hand side, 7 of the schools that grew by enrollment by 1% or more all have some form of parental choice available to families, right? So North Dakota really is the only state on this list that does not have broadly available parental choice programs. And in the data brief, we actually are able to call out an example from the Diocese of Cleveland, and really talking about how the 18 schools in the city of Cleveland experience enrollment growth, even though the overall diocese and the state saw decline in enrollment. So simply put, we need more research and we need more information on this particular phenomenon. And the last piece here is that a common misconception, and this is something that we saw in the media quite a bit in the summer and the fall, is that, hey, if families are leaving public schools, where are they going? They must be going to Catholic schools, right? Well, we looked at a couple of different regions of the country, as well as sort of the national shift here. And so we've been able to sort of track these pieces. On the left-hand side for each of these locations or regions, you're seeing the change in Catholic school enrollment versus the change in public school enrollment. And so this is not necessarily to cast doom and gloom on Catholic schools. What this is really helping illustrate, we believe, is a larger societal problem. Because if students are leaving public schools and they're leaving Catholic schools, where are they going? And I think that piece is so important for us to embrace as a whole society, that this is not just a Catholic schools issue, this is not just a public schools issue, this is a societal issue that could potentially have profound impacts over the next years and for generations to come. And so we feel that it's important to share this data because it leads us into very substantial calls for action as to making sure that we're able to provide quality educational options for all kids. So with that, I'm going to slide it over to Sister Dale, and she'll walk us through some of the challenges that are presented based on our preliminary findings on this data, and most importantly, our opportunities for growth and transformation as a result of our findings here. Sister Dale? We'll make sure you're unmuted first.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Well, one of the first challenges that we need to pay more attention to would be the impact of the lower number of students in earlier grades and what that might mean long-term. Of course, the long-term implications would be, number of students in the pipeline moving through both the elementary school and then feeding into the secondary schools. One of the things we have to be careful about in looking particularly this year at the lower grades is that we're not sure what the COVID impact is. We do see every year a difference between pre-K and K, and then K and first grade, depending on what the public school, a lot of it depends on what the public school offers. Do they have a full day kindergarten? And we seem to lose 2 or 3% going through those earlier years. But with the challenge this year of this distancing requirements, the social distancing requirements, and then the family situations, we're not sure why we have such a disproportionate decrease in enrollment in particularly the pre-K grades. So we need to pay more attention to that. What we don't know, again, this is just simply statistical data we get. We don't know whether the schools were not able to handle in the pre-K settings the numbers they used to handle with the social distancing requirements, or if parents were not willing to send the students. So that's something we need to explore further. Hopefully, once we have this COVID under control, we will see a return of more younger students, but we need to monitor that and see where that's going. And secondly, more school closures are likely given the finances. John mentioned, or Annie mentioned earlier, that we do lose students every year. We have been on average closing somewhere, give or take, around 100 schools a year over the past 2 decades, and losing student population somewhere between 1.8, 2.2 or 3 prior to this year. And what we have to be concerned about is that school closures are part of a whole financial cycle. That if schools have students whose families are in financial difficulty, which was probably going to be part of our reality for the next year or two, as families are trying to get a new footing in jobs that may have been lost and now are coming back, et cetera. But when you're dealing with like a tuition-driven model of a school's financial structure, when parents can't pay, tuition then rises to cover all the costs. And we've seen from John's previous presentation, the staffing costs continue, whether we have a certain number of students. Losing 10 or 12 students in a school does not impact staffing needs, so that we see the cost of education continues to go up. So what happens is, as we lose families, we raise tuition, and then the cycle continues, and then more families can't pay until we get to the point where schools have to close. And unfortunately, for almost every school that closes, finances is the primary reason. You may have a facility that might not be safe to keep open in terms of the infrastructure, but generally speaking, finances is what drives the families. And so we need new funding and governance models. That's the challenge. How can we develop new ways of funding and governing our schools, and particularly in your low income areas in the urban or inner city schools that don't rely on tuition as the driving force of financial vitality. And then going back to the staffing issue, we need to rethink staffing models and resource sharings. I think one of the things that we've learned from this whole COVID experience is how well we can do with technology. And given more training in effective use of technology, we may be able to shift staffing resources in ways that would employ many of part-time people we have full-time if they were spread out virtually across a number of schools and different ways in. So we need to explore that and explore ways in which we can use the technology to improve, the whole model of how we staff and resource our schools. Then another big piece that we need to look at as we keep pushing for government-funded parental choice, we need to figure out why parents aren't using what is available. And we know that from many of the dioceses where they are in a state that has a choice program, they're not picking up enrollment to the degree that it could be possible. So we need to look at, and that can be a challenge at a local level, but also at a national level. Why aren't families accepting the scholarships or vouchers? Is it not enough money? Is it there are not wraparound services, that the school doesn't have lunch or transportation, and so it's not feasible for the family to be able to get their kids there, get their kids fed, and those kinds of programs. We also need to look at why some of the schools don't want to participate in these programs. Not every Catholic school in these states that have the programs are willing to participate in it. So we have to determine, what are the causes of that? Some of it may be having to comply with some of the rules. Some of it may be in not wanting to change the composition of their school drastically. There are a lot of things that we need to look at from a financial and also, I think, from a pastoral perspective on that. So what we need to begin to look at is how we can collaborate and work with those specific organizations that actually offer choice programs or are working to get a choice program in the state, to help them learn from others that we have worked with. What is the best model to use? How do you go about this legislative process of getting attention for your programs that will actually result in a program being established? And then lastly, we need disaggregated data. As we have said over and over again, we only get the data that the diocese sends us. And so many researchers that contact me that want to do something on schools that are in this city or that city, we can't really provide that because we only get the diocese, which incorporates lots of different cities, counties, crosses different boundary lines, so that I only know that there are X number of students in X number of schools or grades, but not specifically which. So I think we can learn from more granular data where it is that attention could be paid and where improvements could be made, just even in the financial viability of the school, as well as some of the other programs that may be provided. So, those are some of the challenges that the data are telling us we need to pay attention to. And before, lest we leave with, all doom and gloom, there are some opportunities that we can cull for our schools out of all of this unusual time that we're in. And so one of them is to learn how to target opportunities to expand options for parents so our schools can remain viable and sustainable. So in addition to the parental choice programs and helping groups work for that, philanthropy still continues to be something that's a very big part of the Catholic tradition, and nationally it's part of a tradition that people want to do good, people want to help, and we need to know how to tap into that in a more sustainable way. And certainly one of the big ways in which we can partner with both corporate and nonprofits to expand families is to market our product better. What is it that we're asking donors, sponsors, collaborators to help with? Why is it important that these schools continue? And how can they have an impact that they can see? That's a big piece of it, actually involving people you're asking to support in our schools. And we certainly could use a lot of different, particularly corporate contributions, not only in terms of finances, but also in terms of expertise. So there are opportunities there we need to learn to trust. And the other thing is we really have to look at our parishes. Catholic schools, for the most part, even though they've been declining that way and are moving into diocesan support, parish schools are our primary mode of operating governance structures for elementary schools in particular. And what we need to really create within the parishes with our pastors is that Catholic schools are an important ministry of the Catholic Church. And there's a pastoral issue here about sustaining these as an investment in the future of the church. This is where the faith is taught on a regular basis, year in and year out. It builds students who are knowledgeable, faith-filled, and who are introduced to more than just the dogma. It's putting that into practice in life and in faith. And all of the service programs that schools use as part of their curriculum, we know from some research outside of our research that those who do participate in service programs tend in large numbers to continue once they are introduced to that model of giving back. And so from a pastoral perspective of carrying on the faith and of creating a community, Catholic schools need to be spoken about more in our parishes, in our parish bulletins, and just not just during Catholic Schools Week. This needs to be an ongoing part of parish life, whether or not there's a school in that parish. And then learning from business and finance leaders, what are models of actually financing and structuring our schools so that they are sustainable beyond a simple tuition-driven model, which is how we've done this since forever. And then utilizing effective marketing strategies so that right now, some of our marketing seems to have hit stride with parents who wanted children in school. Their public school wasn't open, and so they send their children to our schools. how are we working with those families to see, are we going to sustain them? I mean, this is a big issue that the data don't point to, but what's going to happen to those families that we had come into our schools, who are paying full tuition and who are helping to contribute to the vitality of the financial vitality of the school? How well are we marketing our product to those families? How are we hearing from them whether or not this is what they really would want to choose for their students, so that and spread the word to some of their friends who are doing homeschooling or virtual schooling, that there is something here, that their children are succeeding, that their children are happy, they're safe. So those are big parts of what we might look to in terms of what our marketing strategies would be going forward. And then lastly, building and strengthening relationships with our local public school districts. The financial assistance programs that have been part of the CARES Act in Congress that provide for assistance to schools to have safe, healthy environments to deal with student needs in the first CARES Act are all driven by cooperation with the LEA, working with your local school. LEA is the public school district, working with them to obtain the services and benefits that are available. And then the second EANS Act, the second COVID Act, which is the EANS, the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools, that has significant amount of money, $2.7 billion just for private schools, that you work with the state education agency for. But in both CARES 1 and CARES 2, as we're calling it, and in this new bill that's coming through with the consolidated appropriations that they're trying to work on right now, there is money specifically targeted to helping with learning losses and social and emotional health of students that have been directly attributed to the problems they have, directly attributable to this whole corona impact. And so we need to work closely with the people who control that funding on our behalf, but that also have developed some programs that we may collaborate with them and work with them in ways that all students, and lest we forget, less than 20% of Catholic schools, of Catholic students are in Catholic schools. I mean, as a church, we're responsible for all 100% of Catholic students. And so in working with our LEAs in our local districts, we should be able to create together better programs that will help our students make up for this terrible lost year. And for some of them, it will be a whole year that they are not in any actual brick and mortar school with other students. And so those are, some of the opportunities I think we have to create a new vision for our schools and to create a new state of health for our schools, both health in terms of finances as well as the environment. And so I'll stop there. John, we may have some questions.
Yeah, so a ton of great questions coming in. Please keep them coming. I'm going to toss the first one over to Annie. So there's a great question here. And I actually think we got this in advance of our webinar today. The question is, do you happen to know how many schools that closed were located in states where school choice scholarships exist versus the states that do not have school choice?
Yeah, so on average, a state had 3% of their Catholic schools closed. And for those 4 states that we had, Ohio, Arizona, Indiana, and Florida, they had, I think, 0, 1, and 2% each of their schools closed. So it was slightly less that closed.
But we know that there are more than those 4 states that offer school choice programs, but that is a promising finding, I believe. Okay.
Largest number of programs, largest number of students. So they show up more than some of the small programs. And a number of the programs are for special needs students only. So there's a limited population to begin with.
Okay, great. There are a number of questions here. We appreciate the thoughtfulness of folks asking the questions, really asking about how these enrollment trends maybe correlate with enrollment, sorry, not enrollment, but population shifts, how they change with, how they track with changes in Catholic versus non-Catholic. Sister Dale or Amy, do we have any sort of analysis that maybe speaks to how this connects with larger demographic trends?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we've
know.
done studies. Go ahead.
You go, Sister Dale.
Okay, we've done studies in the past on that, and definitely, what we learned is that for many of the Great Lakes, Mid-East, and some of the New England area, the population has changed significantly. They were once very industrial, labor-intensive regions of the country. A lot of those jobs in the steel mills and the clothing industry and so on, they went south or overseas. And so we have this phenomena particularly in the Northeast and Great Lakes area, where we have lots of empty schools or schools that have been converted to something else. And they were not replaced in a sense in the areas south and west where schools went. So we have kids who want to go to schools, but there are none. And then we have schools that are there, but we don't have the kids. So much of it was attributed to the flight from these cities economically, and then that depressed the economy as well. So a lot of it is, and then we'll be looking at the birth rates too, which contributes to changes.
Right. Thanks. A couple of questions here, and I'm synthesizing questions that we're getting from our attendees. So thank you for rolling with this. There are a couple of questions about the impact of homeschooling and charter schools in particular, and I think at least one question about virtual schools. So do we know anything about the impact of those different school sectors, so to speak, that we didn't specifically call out in our slide presentation on Catholic school enrollment?
Well, we know that more than 1 million children are homeschooled and they came from someplace. We don't know how many of them came from our schools. We also know charter schools have grown exponentially. What we don't know there either is where do the kids come from in charter schools. We know that for both homeschooling and charter schools, there are significant numbers who have come from Catholic schools. With the homeschoolers, we're not sure how the family, makes that decision, why they make that decision, and whether it is values driven or something else. With the charter schools, the big question that we've never been able to answer is where did those kids come from? Were they kids in Catholic school who were non-Catholic, whose family sees the charter school as pretty similar to the Catholic school, and so a free option may be attractive to them. I mean, we certainly know it's really hard to compete with free, no matter what the underlying issues are. Free is a challenge, as advocates for parental choice, we support parents' right to choose, which means they sometimes do choose us. And what we need to know more about is why don't they choose us? If they see the charter school looks just like us, there's something wrong with us, that we haven't made the case for our schools being different from and how we are different from a charter school. Of course, it's harder to do that when the Catholic school closes in June and opens up as a charter school in September, and the kids are going to school in uniforms, and people in the neighborhood don't even know it's different. And many of the parents who are looking at both don't realize they're different. So I think that's a huge challenge for us, is how we articulate our mission and our value to families.
That's a great point. And I know that's something that you've spoken to when we were talking about utilizing effective marketing strategies. And NCEA has done work over the last 4 to 5 years, really pursuing market research on the factors that drive parental consideration, not just for new enrollment, but for retaining families. I think an important consideration for us is, what we're seeing here in terms of trends nationally and locally are about net change. And I actually just saw something in the Q&A really talking about what we're seeing here is net change. And so even if we've seen increased interest in schools in dioceses, one of our other challenges is very much that of retention, right? So we have to make sure that we're looking at enrollment through the lens of both recruitment as well as retention. And to that point, and actually there was a question, and Kathy, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one because I think you responded to this in the chat. But there was a question about what the messaging points are, right? So in light of this, and knowing that families are seeing this data about Catholic schools nationwide, what are the talking points for school leaders, for advocates of Catholic schools, I think in the midst of all of this?
Yes, John, and I put in the box that I would email it to people who wanted it, but we'll just go ahead and put it into our Friday email. But the talking points are, one, Annie did a survey of over 1,400 families who sent their children from the public school to Catholic schools for the first time. And they were so happy at the schools, and they were happy at the schools, and hats off to the teachers and principals on this webinar, but they were most happy with the care their children were receiving from their teachers and principals at the school. That's what they loved about the school. And again, you are the people who are doing that work. So thank you. So that's a talking point. Your child will be known and loved at the Catholic school. Two, we need to talk about our academic success. Parents, at the end of the day, parents want their children in a great school where they're going to learn to read and write and do those things well. And so we need to talk about that. We need to show them that children get better, that they learn every day. That kind of data is real. And most importantly, we need to stand on our faith, that we're going to raise your child knowing Jesus, that we're going to educate your child knowing Jesus. We're going to educate your child to be good people, to be people who care, to people who serve others, people who are open to the possibilities that God has for them. And I think those are the things that parents care about most. 5 years ago, it was all about school safety. Will you keep my child safe? It switched a little bit. I think it's because of COVID. And what we're offering is what people are craving. They are craving the relationship, and no one does it better than us, because all of our relationships are based on the relationship we have with our God and Jesus. So that's what I'd say are the talking points. And I'd say those are the strengths of our schools.
There's a couple of questions here. Sorry, go ahead, Dale.
I think also we need to, building on Kathy's piece about the academic success, we need to let people know who we are and what we offer. In the survey we did 2 years ago with parents about choosing schools, one of the big negatives in terms of families was that we don't offer the STEM, we don't offer the technology, we don't have. And yet in the last 2 technology surveys that NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, did, Catholic schools far outperformed public schools on the technology survey that looked at not only, how do you use the tech, that lose primarily on how do you use it in various sectors. That's something that's, just perceived that we don't have. That's really important for people to know.
That and the science too, faith and reason.
There's a question, I'm going to pick this up from the chat, but there was something, and Annie brought it to my attention about a national ad campaign about the benefits of Catholic school. And one of the pieces of research that NCEA is currently conducting is market testing the effectiveness of particular messaging points with prospective Catholic school families. Mm-hmm. So our market research that we had done in collaboration with Fatica in the last couple of years revealed 3 key factors and considerations for why parents choose Catholic schools, whether they're choosing schools for the first time or choosing to retain it. And so we have research pending that's actually testing the effectiveness of those marketing messages on digital and social media. So we're looking forward to sharing those findings in the next couple of months because we feel that they will be instrumental going forward. Annie, this question is for you, and this one is really about the pre-K sort of phenomenon. We know that 40,000 of the 100,000 students that we lost from last year this year are pre-K students. And so there's two parts of this question. Number one, what do we know about how that relates to public school drops in preschool enrollment or even kindergarten enrollment? And can we expect anything in terms of a bounce back?
I think you can argue either way, whether there's going to be a bounce back or not. Historically, when you've looked, we've had more students in preschool than kindergarten. So we are losing, if we're just looking at net completely, we are losing students from preschool to kindergarten. So that worries us. But on the other hand, we hear anecdotally so much how families decided to keep their kids at home. I've seen it in the chat box and the Q&A today, where people have mentioned in their diocese or their schools where families chose to keep their preschoolers at home this year. So we're hoping there'll be a bounce back. And I think right now is the time to lay the groundwork with your marketing, as John and Sister Dale mentioned, talking about, you know, what makes your school so great. They should enroll your school in kindergarten. Public school data, I've seen exactly what that percent is for K that they lost. The national data that Chalkby and AP mentioned, which we put in this report, was K through 12. But so we're still looking into that.
Okay. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of these questions. And I think, to be very frank, a lot of the questions that are posed here have a lot to do with areas for further research. And we appreciate the depth of thinking and know that, you know, we at NCEA definitely have work that we're excited to endeavor, I think, based on some of the challenges that are posed here. Kathy, Sister Dale, Annie, are there any other things that we want to sort of touch on? We're just over the hour mark.
No, I just want to express my gratitude to all those who do provide us the data, and to encourage all of you, particularly at the school level, when you're asked to contribute data, to give it a good consideration. The data are only as good as what we get. The outcome is only as good as the data we get, and so it's really important, particularly since NCEA is really the only organization, and we got that mandate from the bishops many years ago, to collect data on behalf of the Catholic schools. So we are the only reliable source of data. But it's also important, I mentioned NAEP earlier, it's really important that we get validated outside ourselves. So when you're asked to participate in the NAEP reading or math, or it's important to participate in those kinds of opportunities to collect data too, since, as I said, it's an independent evaluation basically, and we always do really well. So just offer that as, another emphasis on data are important. We make good decisions when we have good data.
And I would just like to thank Sister Annie and John for all their work, and to say Sister's right. Annie's study was over 1,400 parents. Some people have put in chat box, I want that study. We could have had more if we just had a little bit more participation. So if we ask you to participate in a study, we hope that you will. In that case, the study, all you had to really do was send it out to your parents. But if a school sent out to their parents and we got enough data back, Annie gave you a full report on what your parents said about your school. So we're trying to be helpful. And so if you give us the data, we want to give it back to you. So, and in a usable form. So please stick with us and hang with us. And if you can help us collect data, that would be fantastic. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that Karen Risto, the former president of NCEA, has been on this webinar. And Karen, we're so glad that you're still part of our NCEA family and still contributing. So thank you for participating today and for just always being there for everyone at NCEA. We really appreciate your help. John, Annie, Dale have worked so hard on this, and we are very grateful to them. And again, there's much opportunity. Look for more. This is the first webinar. It's not the last. So look for more. And don't forget to sign up for convention, because again, this topic will be covered at convention along with many others. So convention is April 6th, 7th, and 8th, and it's online, and the early bird ends on February 28th. So if you have a chance, sign up, and don't forget about that watch party. It's the best PD offering around. So we hope that you'll participate. So unless there's something else, we're going to say thank you for being here, and look
Yes.
look in the email for the next date.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay warm and safe.
Definitely.
Okay.